Hey folks, and welcome back to the Inside the Mix podcast. And this is another live episode on Facebook in the Inside the Mix Facebook group. If you are joining us, thank you for joining us. And in this episode, I'm very excited to welcome our guest today, Henrietta Edlund, aka Tota. She is a 27-year-old artist from Sweden who's been growing her solo project since 2020 with a multitude of EPs and collaborations behind her, as well as her releases in her punk band. She's going to share with us her musical story and the production and inspiration behind her debut album, Poolhouse.exe. And hi, Tota, and thanks for joining me today. Where are you joining us from?
Thanks. Yeah, I'm joining from Malmö, Sweden, so the most southern tip of Sweden, basically.
Oh, amazing, amazing. You are the first Swedish artist that we've had on the show, so that's fantastic. Lovely stuff.
My honour. I'll happily represent all of Sweden.
Brilliant, brilliant. I did see on social media, and I know you emailed me in the week about performing live, which is amazing. It's great to see artists performing live again, and we'll come back to that and later on in the episode. But I'm just going to read a bit more of your bio here. So we've got the debut album, Poolhouse.exe, brings a mix of 80s vaporwave, synthwave, pop and ambience with a heavy focus on dreamy vocals and atmospheric samples. So you create the cinematic experience of a simulation program gone wrong. The sense of escapism that permeates the album creates an inviting and mysterious narrative for listeners to enjoy. That's an amazing description, I must say. I love that. I love that description. That's what I'd really like to do, just to start off with. Anytime I get a new artist on the podcast, it's just to learn a bit, and so the audience can learn a bit more about your sort of musical background. So can you tell us a bit more about your life prior to Tota? Where did music begin for you, and how did it begin?
Yeah, sure. I started extremely early because when I was young, my mother was a piano teacher and she worked only with teaching students from home. So the house was always filled with just piano music all day, every day. So I started with her when I was about 3 years old and stuck with the piano until I was about 11, I think. And then I picked up the drums completely randomly out of the blue. I guess such a weird, super cool and non-awkward kid to be the piano kid who also loves to tap dance. Yes, tap dance. So when I was 6 years old, I started taking tap dance classes, and I think I've just always been a little obsessed with music in general, but especially rhythms. So I really loved that. When I was 11 in school, I just saw that in the music room they brought in an electric drum kit for the first time, and I was like, "Ooh, what's this?" And I used to just stay behind after class in school and bang on the drums until finally I just convinced my parents that I needed to get a drum kit. So quite a bit of schooling when it comes to piano music and classical music, but I dropped that kind of maybe when I was 13, transitioned over into drumming instead. And drumming, I'm mainly self-taught. I think I took classes for like half a year, but I think I was scared to death of my drum teacher who would just loudly bang a cowbell and yell at me to stay in time. And I was like, okay, I guess. But yeah, so piano and drums are my main thing. And I took a bit of an odd journey with it. I played a lot in different bands, as you do as a kid, just as the drummer, but was always very involved in writing the music as well. I've always loved writing music on the piano, and also singing. I was mainly doing dance and choreography for the majority of my life, I think up until I was 24 when I had a bit of a career switch. But I think the combination of working so much with music as a dancer and then also having the background of being a piano player and a drummer all culminated into this odd perspective on music and movement and the atmosphere of music. And then I took a bit of a side turn and just fell into the punk band Are Are that you mentioned before.
Yeah.
And that's when music started basically going well for me, I guess, in Little Sweden, in southern Sweden, in punk Sweden. That little niche, we managed to make a bit of a name for ourselves and won a big music award in Sweden just a couple of years ago, and started gaining some traction with that. Got invited to South by Southwest and such, but
amazing,
because of the pandemic, couldn't fucking go. So, can I curse on this?
Yeah, of course you can. It's fine. I should have told you that off air, but yeah, it's fine.
My bad.
No, that's fine.
But yeah, so basically, I would never have expected myself to be a punk drummer primarily. So I don't listen that much to punk music, really. I like the drive and the energy of it. But yeah, it's a bit of a side turn from what I expected. But basically, from that, I started wanting to take music seriously, and it kind of sparked this wish to produce and create on my own completely, which led me to finally making the solo project. It feels very stereotypical, no? The drummer in like a punk band, rock band, metal band finally gets themselves a proper DAW set up and just begins producing random shit, starting with lo-fi and then falling into synthwave.
Amazing. That's quite a journey. I'm going to be honest. I didn't think that this. Actually, to be fair, I couldn't tell you what the music scene's really like in Sweden, but I didn't imagine it had a punk scene. That's amazing to hear. And getting invited to South by Southwest is impressive, and it's gutted that you couldn't make it. So you mentioned there. So you've done drums. You've got the piano, and obviously you're singing as well. So obviously you come from that sort of band environment. So you're well adept to playing live. So what is it you think that you said you were producing lo-fi and then you moved into synthwave because are you totally in the box when it comes to your singing, your songwriting and production when in the box, as in using your computer, or do you have hardware as well?
No, completely digital. I think I may have borrowed an analog synth or two from the guy who mixes and masters my stuff, an audio engineer. He has quite a few, and I think I borrowed one for just a little melody here or there that I wanted. Something better that I didn't have a plug for. But basically, it's not a style choice as such. I'd love to be able to work more with actual hardware and such, but it's cheaper. I can
100%.
I use only free plugins, and I use primarily Splice, if you know that sample.
Yeah, I use Splice as well. Yeah.
Such a great... I'd recommend that for anyone early in starting up their solo projects, if you just want a good sample base with a variety of sounds and drum sounds and such. It's quite good. It's decent enough to get you going, at least.
Yeah, I would agree, and I use Splice myself for that reason. I was actually I had a podcast interview yesterday with an artist called Russell Nash, and we were discussing this and how I use Splice to get influence. If I've ever got sort of writer's block or creative's block, and I can't think of an idea, I'll often go to Splice and or if I've got a song and I'm thinking actually I can't design the sound I want, but I've got the key and I've got the tempo, I'll go on Splice and have a look, and it's amazing, isn't it? The wealth of really, really good samples on there.
And it's funny you say when you have writer's block that you go to it, because it's kind of the same. I use it in a similar way sometimes when I feel like, because it's lovely making things completely as a solo artist, but you do lack that kind of we call it bollplank in Swedish, somebody to bounce ideas off of. And I use Splice kind of that way. I'll listen to different loops and I imagine it as if I'd have had a bass player, I'd have gone up and said, I want something funky. Can you just play something and we'll see if we can figure something out? And I'd have the bass player try out a riff or two, and that would inspire me. That's what I kind of do with Splice. When I listen to different samples and loops, it can kind of get your own creative juices going. Usually I'll just get an idea and then I'll go find my own sound for it and make my own version. But yeah, it's a really good way to get out of your own mind.
It's interesting you mentioned that. I've never thought of it that way, but that is true, and that's the reason I use it, because I come from a band background as well, and I would have done the exact same. It would have been a case if someone comes up with a riff or a bass line or a vocal hook, and you kind of like you bounce ideas around, but now I don't have that. I never thought of it that way, and that's the way I use it. It's literally it's like a soundboard. I think, okay, I need a bit of help, immediate help, and I immediately go to that reference and that sample library. No, I never thought of it that way. That's quite true. That is part of my workflow. I'm glad I'm not the only one who does that. That's good to know.
Yeah.
So going back to the music side of things,
Yes.
I'm going to come back to sort of moving into synthwave in a bit, but what I want to know is, like, you mentioned drums, piano, punk. Was there a poignant or like a moment? What song, artist, or album had a really long-lasting effect on you as an artist, or really inspired you to be a creative?
I was thinking about it, but I struggle when people ask about inspiration like that, because I think it's because I started with piano when I was 3, and equally as much as I played and learned the piano, I just started writing music. I'm not saying I wrote good shit. I wrote trash, you know?
Yeah,
but I've always made stuff. And it's just, like I said, I used to be a dancer as well. I've just it sounds so like I'm full of myself saying that I'm just naturally creative. I'm not saying that I'm good. I'm just saying that I always make things. I always walk around singing random stuff. And I have an acoustic piano, I just always have had, and I just always sit and make stuff. So there's nothing that like sparked me from being a non-musical person to being a musical person. I feel like I've always just been. I guess a lot of Bach, the classical piano guy, because that's what I played when I was a kid with my mum, because she loved him. And then... weirdly enough, I feel like I might get hung out to dry for this. I've listened to a couple bands a lot, and they kind of influenced me. The Beatles, classic. Listened to all of their albums multiple times, and the continuous harmonies, I think, about almost always having dubbed vocals plus harmonies on top of it. That just sounds natural to me. And then a bit of a side swerve, System of a Down with their the scale that they use. I don't know the music theory terms for it, but it's got a bit of a different melodic structure to it. And that just always, I'll catch myself sometimes. I have a song called Ta min hand, Swedish for Take My Hand. And... it's got that weird... Somebody said to me after the live gig, they're like, "What? Where the fuck did that come from? It sounds kind of Arabic." And I was like, yeah. Listened to a lot of System of a Down as a kid, and I think it just stuck with me. And then I'm just a huge hip-hop head. So generally being in love with beats. Yeah. So a mixture of those things. Nothing that sparked a clear transition into wanting to make music. More just a full-on immersion and obsession with always listening and working with music, as well as creating.
Oh, that's amazing. That's quite a range of influences, isn't it? It's quite a range of, like, going from the Beatles to System of a Down. Is that the Toxicity album?
All of them.
All of them.
Literally all of them.
All of them. I won't lie, the only one I've listened to is Toxicity, and this is any System of a Down fans listening now, it's probably the only album I really listened to. I was never a huge fan, and I think I was probably the only person around at the time when they're still a big band now. I don't know if they're still gigging. Are they gigging? I think they do every now and again.
Yeah, they came together for some fundraising gig a while back. But yeah, no, it was never... I used to play in like indie pop bands and such, and it was very uncool to like System of a Down because they were like cheesy metal. But I had such a deep love, you know? I didn't just love Chop Suey and Toxicity. I love the like hidden tracks. They have fucking a Wu-Tang cover.
No, really?
Yeah.
I'm going to need to hear this.
It's just, if you dig deep, they're a wild bunch. And especially, I think I love... two things quite clearly. The drummer has a clear way of splitting the song into chapters. And that I've actually taken quite literally with me into my punk music with Arre Arre, that I'll try to very clearly indicate a verse transitioning into a chorus with different type beats, always switching, very rarely just sticking to one thing throughout and adding solos. Much rather just giving background in different chapters, so to say. And then the harmonies. The way that they harmonize with each other is, I'm obsessed with it. And I still am to this day.
I think I quite like the vocal phrasing as well, because like it was around that new metal era, wasn't it? And I think I was a big sort of like Limp Bizkit, Papa Roach, Linkin Park, and then there was System of a Down, and then there's POD, and there were all these other bands coming from America. I think there was a band called A, which represented the UK. Don't know what they're doing now. But the vocal phrasing of Surge is something to behold as well. And it is different, isn't it? Like you say, you've got those. I don't know what the mode or the scale is that they use, but it just makes it interesting. And it's great that you can incorporate it in your own music too. I thought about, because I quite like Spanish and flamenco music, and I thought, you know what, I'd quite like to incorporate that into my music, but maybe I will one day. I think I want to get my head around it a bit more, or maybe I should just dive in. I don't know, but it's cool that you were able to get it into your music. Have you ever got any other sort of around the world, for want of a better way of putting it, sort of influences in your music?
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned Spanish. I am part Spanish. My grandmother's from Spain.
Oh, cool.
So there's always been a bit of like Santana and such playing around the house as well. And the same song, actually, that I just mentioned, Tom in Hand, it has this very Latin vibe beat, as well as a guitar solo that also sounds extremely like a Spanish guitar, with just me pretending that I can play. I took some guitar lessons and I was like, I'm sure I can start playing guitar in my tracks, but no, I'm too trash. So I just play it on my synthesizer as a MIDI file, and I tried to like fake strum by hitting the notes, lower notes to higher notes, as I play it on the to try to make it sound like it's more real, but I don't know how well I managed. But that, yeah, a bit of a Spanish flair sometimes comes through.
Amazing.
But otherwise, no, I don't know. I guess there's I'm submerged in the Swedish culture of music. I think that we generally lean towards a kind of melancholy vibe.
Yeah.
Even in joyous songs, it's like we have this twinge of just a melancholy vibe somewhere in the production. I think it's because we get too little sunlight and we're all depressed for half the year. It's literally just something you go talk about. If anyone's down from September to like, I don't know, March, everyone's like, yeah, you're just winter depressed. Okay, figures.
I was going to ask that, actually, when you mentioned about the melancholy. I was going to say, was there anything to do with sunlight? And you sort of answered that for me.
Also, why I'm reflecting my fucking screen, because I'm so pale.
Yeah. Yeah. It's still I tell you what, going off on a total tangent here, it's always a place I've wanted to visit. There's a particular brand, because I'm quite a big metalhead, and there's the sort of like the mellow death, as they call it in heavy metal, and a lot of it emanates from from Sweden.
Yeah, northern Sweden, like the metal
the Gothenburg
scene is...
sound.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. I'm kind of trying to think of bands off the top of my head now. I think In Flames are from Sweden. I'm sure they are.
They are.
I'm sure they are. Yeah.
Isn't Metallica as well Swedish?
Oh, Lars. Lars is the drummer. Yeah, he is. Yeah. He's Swedish. Lars Ulrich.
And Opeth, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Because I remember I mentioned that Arre Arre, my punk band, won a music award. We were chucked into the rock and metal category, and we won over Opeth. And I think I broke my own heart, because I'm an Opeth fan. I was like, we don't deserve this.
That's incredible.
Yeah, but yeah.
Well done.
mean, oh God, let me never have it said publicly online that we don't deserve this. I'm sure we deserve this. I love my band. I love my bandmates. I just felt intimidated as a drummer who loves Opeth, being like, I'm not being modest. I'm not that good. You know, I'm a punk drummer. I just play hard and fast. That was wild.
I was going to say, that's some accolade, isn't it? I mean, Opeth are well entrenched in this in music, and like big, I would imagine. So that's well done. That's very impressive. But no, going back to it's one of the reasons why I would love to go to Sweden, just for that, and to experience that, and I like just getting out and about, to be honest. But I digress. What we're going to move on to now is sort of the birth of Tota as an artist. So you mentioned earlier that you got your laptop and you moved into production.
Yeah.
What made you sort of kickstart that side of things? Because you're in the punk band. which is different to lo-fi and moving into that pop and synthwave and ambient sort of music. What made you pivot into that genre?
It's I think it's because I've been making songs in the band, in the punk band. We make them very collaboratively. We're all part of the process, and just having our music do well and feeling like, oh, I'm making songs that are actually getting played on the radio. It was such a clear validation. I kind of wish that I hadn't waited for that. But it's because I'd been a dancer for most of my life, I kind of always felt like I had my musician friends and they took music seriously, but I wasn't allowed to occupy that space because I'd chosen dance and that was my life and my identity. But then when things started going well, like I said, I kind of felt like, oh, maybe I'm allowed to actually make music because people are taking my ideas seriously. So because of that, I just started wanting to make stuff on my own to see if I'm allowed to choose everything, what kind of music do I make? And it was an extremely scattered and wide range of music that I started making to begin with. I've always made music on piano music, and thought about going into more like movie scoring and that type of stuff. So started by producing some of those tracks, getting to add actual orchestra to things that I'd written long ago. But then I guess just coming from being a huge hip-hop fan and trying to make beats, the kind of lo-fi vibe just came naturally because I couldn't produce things very high quality, and I listened very much to lo-fi at the time. So my very first EP, it's me stretching my legs and trying out production, basically. Yeah. I feel like I go from the single Kiss Me is a pure trap song. It has insane drops towards the end that are like clearly trap music. I remember I wanted a siren in the production of that song and I didn't know how to get one, so I literally didn't pitch, but added effects to the vocals and whined like into the mic and then just stretched that out, and I was like, that's a siren kinda, it's very me just trying to figure out what I can do. And then I think I did a collaboration EP with an American producer who gave me beats, or he produced the songs and I just came in and put the vocals down, and they were much more lo-fi because that's what he did. Yeah. And I think that pushed me further towards the lo-fi kind of vibe. So my next project also had kind of a baseline of lo-fi productions, lo-fi beats. Nice. It's easy if you're a drummer and you like making chill beats and have a kind of weak spot for ambience and atmosphere. Yeah. And then you also have a background as a piano player. It kind of just went hand in hand because it was easy to just find a nice sounding electric piano and put down a cool chord progression and it would sound halfway decent. But I think in that second solo EP that I released, you can start sensing that I'm kind of beginning to dive into creating more cinematic sounds. Yeah. I got really obsessed with wanting it to sound like the song took place on the moon in a kind of spacey atmosphere at a diner on the moon was what I was thinking. So I started incorporating samples of people talking at a restaurant and playing shit over the radio at the same time as the track was going. But only like dipping my toe into it. Still just very playful in my approach to music. No red thread between the songs. No big concept, just really, still really just trying out production. And I'm glad I did that. And I think I'll continue to do it. My kind of, where I've landed now is that I think I'll always have a really scattered approach to music making. I still want to make more trap songs, for example. That's very far away from my synth sound. I'd like to try my hand more at pure hip-hop beats still. And rather than creating different alter egos and releasing under different names, I think I'm going to have synthwave as my main genre and release full-length albums in the synthwave genre, but do side projects, little EPs, with just collections of songs in different genres, so that I can keep it all under one name, but I can still allow the breadth that I want for my solo project.
That's really cool. It kind of gives me inspiration, actually, to be honest, because I'm in just to summarize what you said there about having no common thread throughout your songs on your releases, and that you're trying out these different genres, and which is amazing, because it's very similar to my own self, in that I've released R&B, I've released house, I've released synthwave, synth pop music. And interestingly enough, I'm in the process of writing an EP, and one of the songs on there is like, I think I've coined it like trap wave. It's like, it's got like a trap beat, and then there's these synths and stuff going on over the top of it. But I'm still trying to figure out like where I want to go. But the way you've described it there, I think is amazing, in that you've got that you're going to be under one name, and it's going to be synthwave, and then those sort of like sub EPs are various different sort of genres, or like pivoting. And I think I'm going to take influence from that, and I'm sure the audience will as well, listening, because I think that's the route I'm going to go down now. I've never thought of it that way, so you sort of inspired me to go off and do that myself, which is amazing.
I figure as long as you're not signed to a label and dependent on them to want to release everything physically, then you're that's one of the benefits, from being independent. And even were I to be signed, I figure I would like to keep the right to then produce full-length albums and proper projects in the synthwave genre, so that I'm aesthetically coherent in those productions, but still allowed to release digitally on my own independently, like I do now, still in these little side EPs. Because that's, I think, what will make any musician feel like they can do this for their entire life, is the feeling that you're allowed to breathe and grow and try things out, so that it always stays playful and inspiring. Else it can always just feel a bit stagnant. Do you say that now? Yeah, stagnant.
Yes,
and, stiff.
That's the way I would describe it, yeah. And I think that's great. I was having a conversation with someone yesterday. I think it was on the... Yeah, it was on the podcast yesterday. I thought it might have been via WhatsApp, and the artist was saying how they're going to introduce funk into their next production, which is previously synthwave, but they're going to introduce funk, and I was kind of like, yeah, it's great. I love hearing, because a lot of artists come at synthwave from like these really obscure places, and then bring in these sort of influences, and it just keeps it fresh and stops it from becoming stagnant, as you mentioned there.
Yeah, that's kind of what I like about synthwave as well. Calling it my main genre, I still feel like there is an openness to the synthwave genre that allows for me to make weird cinematic, atmospheric, or the Spanish sounding stuff that I had, as well as a pure, more disco 80s track. Like there's still a lot of wiggle room within that genre itself as well. But yeah, it's nice to keep it mixed up.
Yeah, totally. And I think that moves on to quite nicely to my sort of next line of questioning. So like moving on to the debut album. So the debut album is called Poolhouse.exe. Great name. So my first question, actually, before I move on to the music, why Poolhouse.exe? Specifically the executable file sort of suffix at the end.
Because contrary then to my EPs that are kind of scattered and have no red thread, this is extremely cinematic and like a full-on concept album. There's a storyline that nobody will understand from listening to it. Nobody knows. I've not written about it anywhere or told anyone about it, but I know. And it's literally meant to be a simulation program that's gone wrong. And I want Poolhouse.exe is the file that the person in this virtual reality is living in. So they start... The first song is the kind of transition from real life, where you can hear a song on a radio, that transitions into a really dreamy, reverby vocal where you can hear water lapping in a pool. And that's the kind of mental transition of the pool house loading in. And the first song is a very, literally the vibe I was going for was loading screen, as if a program was just starting up.
Yep.
And then it just goes on a journey of something going wrong, small little hints throughout the album of somebody trying to wake up and not being able to, somebody trying to reach them, but yeah, not getting through to them, and constantly the sound of water in either the pool or being underwater, or a kind of paradise level that I have in this made-up pool house program that I've made, and transitions between each one, like literally a person going through different levels of a pre-planned program that they're meant to wake up from at the end, but they don't. So it's it's got an odd looking name, but it's kind of an overarching idea as well for making synthwave my main project. My next one that I'm working on now is extremely early stages, so I may change this, but I'm wanting to name all of the albums different programs. So this one was a pool house, and all of the songs took place in this kind of imaginary pool house. And the next one is going to be the same concept of virtual reality, not where something goes wrong though, just a program that runs clean, but one that is a kind of nightlife city one. So I'm thinking of calling it Midnight City, because synthwave and midnight, you know.
Oh, well, there
classic
you go,
names.
Yeah, of course.
But so
that's really interesting. So you kind of like started answering my next question, which was about the songwriting and compositional process. So you mentioned there you've got this concept and this common theme throughout, and there's the overlapping of the songs. Do you start with that idea? Do you have like a sketchboard or some proverbial sketchboard, as it were, and then start fleshing it out with ideas, or does it come once you start writing the songs?
It came from fucking Reddit, as all things do.
Oh wow.
I randomly stumbled into something called aesthetic pools, which is like a subculture under synthwave. You get to vaporwave. Under that you can find the aesthetic pools and liminal spaces and such, and those images, the artwork that some people make of these 3D renditions of 80s looking retro futuristic empty malls or empty pools and such, just really got me wanting to write one singular song for a room with a pool in it specifically. And that became that loading screen song. And from that, I immediately just loved the concept of this imaginary space that I'd created. So it came from a very visual point. And I think that's why the entire thing is so cinematic, because it came from images. But that's not usually how I've structured songwriting. And each song, once I had the concept down from that first track, I knew, okay, I want all of the songs to take place in this imaginary world. Then I kind of opened it up to my regular songwriting process, which can be just a beat that I wanted to go an 80s classic, do-do, do-do-do-do, do-do, do-do-do-do. That'll be like, oh, I want to make a song that's based off of that. And then I'll let that grow naturally, and I'll see where it fits into the pool house, so into the concept. Or I'll have a line, the very cheesy classic, I'll never learn to love again. I just had that line hit me out the blue. And then I was like, yes, that is the drama that I need for this 80s love song, and that led to a song. Or the classic would be, I sit down by the piano and I just doodle until I find a nice melody or a nice chord progression, and I bring that to Logic and try my hand at finding a cool synth sound, and one thing leads to another. So the songs themselves come from very different places, but the concept for the album quite clearly came from a visual inspiration.
Interesting stuff. Yeah, it's quite cool that. I like that idea, the visual inspiration, and it's that sort of like genre, I guess, for want of a better way of putting it, I'm not familiar with. But now that you mention it, I do see a lot of imagery with regards to swimming pools and malls as well when you're scrolling through Instagram, for example, which is really cool. And you sort of went on to answer my next question, which was about the whole songwriting process and how you kick off. So it's which is great. So I mean, what I want to move on to next is actually, before I move on to that, is you mentioned there that you use Logic, and I remember right at the beginning of the interview, actually, you mentioned that you use primarily free VSTs.
Yeah.
My question to you is why is it that you stick with the free VSTs over buying? I mean, is it pure budgetary, or is it the case of like you like to limit your creative possibilities?
No, please send money. No. It's truly budgetary. I would say it kind of goes hand in hand. I like to be forced to kind of dive into the details of what I'm given. If I'm given an overwhelming amount of material to work with, it can be overwhelming. Whereas here I've kind of had to dig deep into every single sound and go really tweak sounds to try to make them sound original. And as well, get creative with splice, kind of have my hands tied a little bit, because I'd have to use something that wasn't exactly the way that I'd imagined it. It's kind of, I think I'm not good enough of a producer yet to completely realize a sound that I have in my head just with a synthesizer, as some people truly can. And so for my level of competency within production, it kind of worked out to not have too many options, to be honest. But that being said, I would have liked to have had a few more drum packs with better drum sounds, and just a singular, nice, thick collection of cool synthwave sounding synthesizers, like a DX7 type.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, just like some basics would have been nice, I think. I feel like what I could scrape together now has covered all of my releases, which is still, 3 EPs and a full-length album. But for my next album, I feel like I'll be reusing too much if I didn't get myself some new stuff. So I'm hoping to at least buy 1 or 2 new proper plugins to use.
That's great. I think you sort of you answered the question the way I imagined you would, which was, and the way I do it as well, is I think it's great to have a huge sonic palette, and you can have all these VSTs, and you can have all these plugins, which is great, and then you could have this arsenal at your disposal. For the audience listening now, I'm making my hands really wide, and then it's you sort of, I don't know, I can get lost in those, and I think being limited with my creative possibilities, much like yourself, what you mentioned there, means that I have to go deeper into what I have, which is pretty much what you said, and really explore what it is that you have at hand. And I also think when it comes to synthesis as well, like sound sampling and synthesis, actually digging properly deep into it is the only way that you're really going to learn. I think because I've been down this road whereby you can have all these different synthesizers, and I'll move from synth to synth to synth, trying to find the sound I want, rather than actually, you know what, I'm just going to focus on this one and see if I can sculpt it here, rather than just waste time moving around. So, yeah, I like the idea of being limited. I definitely do. I find it helps. I don't know about you, but it helps my workflow if I'm limited in terms of time as well. I find deadlines sort of help me. Otherwise, I'm gone. So, with regards to your creative process, that kind of comes up with another question of mine. When it comes to your songwriting and composition, do you set yourself deadlines? Do you think, right, actually, I need to have it finished at this point, and then I need to move on, or is it quite fluid, the way that you approach your songwriting?
No, I do think I give myself kind of deadlines. I think I'm used to, literally from the work of being a freelance dancer and choreographer, always, but anything that you do freelance is like, it's not going to work as a job unless you fucking do it and complete things. So I'm very quick to as soon as I have song ideas, I'm quick to categorize them into projects, and then I prioritize which project. Like, I do very big timelines as well as small within a project. So no, I do think I put deadlines. I'm not hard on myself though if I muck it up. They dynamically kind of expand depending on what's going on in my life. But yeah, I think deadlines are really important. Also, just to stop fidgeting with a track after a while, you know? You could polish it forever, but at some point it's like, you gotta let it go, you know? Yeah,
I totally agree with that, and I think I've had this conversation with quite a few interviewees, and it's basically the case. I think I didn't coin the term, but it's another podcast where they said it was binge editing, and I've been known to do that, where I just move stuff around. I'm like, well, why am I doing this? Like, and you just gotta, because it's going to be to the detriment of the music ultimately. But it's part of a learning curve. Well, I want to move on before we move on to the live music side of things. There was one track in particular I wanted to get a bit more information on, which is called Deep Dark. Now, I wasn't aware that you were a drummer before, but I did pick out the drums on this one in particular.
Yes.
So if you can give us a bit of information with regards to like the drum sound on that, because in my notes I've got that it hits quite hard, and I'm a big fan of like a lot of low end and hard hitting drums, and especially like the bass up. And I think you mentioned earlier, actually, I'll let you answer those two before I move on to the next one. So the drums and the bass on that track, how did that come about? How did you create those?
So the bass line, the ARP, is a sample, Thank You Splice, and that was strange. I'd gone a completely direction with the sample at first, and I didn't like it and ended up not using it. And then I came back to the sample itself without the track that I'd made for it, and I was like, ooh, it's a shame to throw the sample away just because I made a shitty song. So I like...
I've done that.
I was like, this one deserves a second chance. And for some reason I was thinking kind of the music that I listened to with my dad. He's a huge hip-hop head as well, like Grandmaster Flash and old school hip-hop. And what's it called? The Don't Push Me 'Cause I'm Close to the Edge. It's an old...
Yeah, I know the song.
It's got these really classic doom, do-doom. I don't know. It's just a classic, nice old school hip-hop beat. And that kind of influenced the type of beat that I wanted to make. I wanted to make a beat that me and my dad would dance to. And I think that also took form in the track that you're talking about now, Deep Dark. It has like a solid 1 minute dance break. Instrumental break, but where it's just the bass and the drums, because that was really the driving forces in making this song. But yeah, so it came from kind of a hip-hoppy inspiration, and then using very clearly synthwave, like a kick sample and a snare sample, so that I could build the beat completely on my own. When it comes to the mixing of it, I have to shout out my audio engineer, Joer, that I use, an old music friend of mine, who just made it sound tight and punchy in a nice way, but still keeping it like synth wavy, especially not just synth wave, but vapor wavy, the kind of trashy sound almost to a lot of the songs. But so yeah, a bit of splice, a bit of hip hop love, and that's what was behind the bass and drums of that track.
That's really cool. It's interesting that it's sort of I picked out the bass and the drums, and it just so happens that the bass and the drums were like the driving force behind the song.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably why I was able to pick them out as like really poignant and sort of standing out elements of the track.
Yeah.
And I like the idea of sort of like tight, punchy drums. It's definitely the way I like to go with production as well. That's probably another reason why it stood out. Anytime I hear those really sort of like tight, like for want of a better way of saying it again, punchy drums with that nice balanced low end as well. Always, as soon as I hear that, I'm like, ooh, well, that sort of like gets my interest straight away. But my next question about the song was going to be the vocals. And I think you mentioned it earlier about the reverb, the use of reverb.
Yeah.
And you've got that wash of reverb on there, and that's sort of like time-based processing. So on this track in particular, what was the idea there?
Well, the reverb throughout the entire album is actually it's based off of I'm not explaining this well at all. When I made this album in a demo stage before sending it to my audio engineer, I had the same reverb preset on every single track, regardless of if I wanted it to be a more disco-y, punchy track or one of the super ambient ones. I wanted it to cinematically represent being in the virtual reality. So it's a kind of it's a concept thing that the reverb is so extreme, regardless of the track, regardless of if it maybe suits the track's general aesthetic. I forced the reverb on there because I wanted it to take place in this dream world where everything just sounded like that. So yeah, I found it actually by using, again, back to when you have limited knowledge or limited ability, Logic had a preset that wasn't for vocals. It was for experimental stuff. I think you're meant to use it for, like, I don't know, something else at least. And it was called Moving Spaces. And it was some kind of space reverb that was, completely drawn out, extremely wet reverb that just never fucking ended. And I got really used to that sound, so I asked my audio engineer to try to match that in some way. But the details as to how he did it, I don't know. I just say try to make it sound like this, and then I whine if it doesn't.
Is that I use Logic myself. Is that the convolution reverb they have that you use? The Space Designer, that's the one I think it's called. Yeah. Or do you use the other
exactly. But it's a preset. If you look into the preset, what they've used is the space. It's called Space Designer, yeah. Space Reverb, yeah. But the sound itself is called Moving Spaces in the experimental preset.
I'm going to look into that because I'm producing a track myself at the moment, and I've sent it to a few other artists, and they've sort of said to me that you need to like swamp that reverb. Swamp that vocal at this point with reverb. So I'm going to go in and have a quick listen and see what it sounds like.
Yeah, check out
somewhere I need to go.
Putting the preset on, and then like using that as a baseline, and either trying to emulate it on your own or tweaking it was basically how I got the vocal sound for the entire track before sending it to my audio guy.
No, it's great. It's a great song. And one of the reasons I wanted to pick it out was just to hear a bit more about the production. It's a great album in total, and I strongly encourage the audience to go and have a listen. And,
thank you.
As I always do, I'll put the links to it. I'm pointing down now. I always do this on a podcast. Actually, no, I release videos now, so it does make sense for me to do this.
Exactly.
But, I'll put links to it in the show notes so they can go away after the episode. And obviously, if they haven't already, go and have a listen to this. But I've just, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a quick look on Facebook. It's not been a massive turnout, but we've had 2 or 3 throughout. And there's one comment from Logan, who is an artist called Fangs, who I interviewed, I reckon back in, I want to say episode 16, something like that. So, thanks for big shout out for you there, Logan. Thank you very much. I've said this is the third time I'm going to say it now with these. It is quality over quantity when it comes to to the audience count. But what I want to move on to next, so we've sort of like discussed the background, we've discussed the latest release, is the future for you as Tota. So, interestingly, last night you gigged. I saw on Instagram, amazing stuff. So can you tell our audience a bit about the transition from producing in the sort of home environment, the home studio or the studio environment, to moving onto the stage? Sort of what challenges did you face?
I guess in the thing that feels probably overwhelming to anyone starting to produce a solo project is like, literally, how the fuck do I get anyone to listen to this? Other than like forcing my parents or my boyfriend to like listen to this new thing I made. And as awful and soul crushing as it can be, kind of grinding away at a chosen social network platform, picking one like either Facebook or Instagram or maybe TikTok nowadays, and trying to find the community that suits the genre that you're working in, and then trying to make some connections there is a good way to just, I don't know, get your name in the right places and be a name in the right room. Also, collaborations was a big thing for me, to collaborate with other artists as well, to make sure, again, I feel like it's very word of mouth almost.
Yes.
But over the internet, and specifically in the music area, among a certain level of musicians. I feel like I could quite literally feel the transition with my punk band when we got public recognition, when we had an award, and then suddenly, you know, we didn't have to look for gigs, or when we got signed, or when we got a booking agency, that these things are just non-issues after a while. But the transition from it being a real issue, like how do I get anyone to want to listen to my music when all I want to do is make the music? I don't enjoy selling myself or selling my music. So it can be a bit of it can be tough work, I think, to make sure that to stay active on social media and such. But the way that I found I could contribute to the kind of word of mouth spreading of my music was by collaborating, saying yes to projects with people, just doing, helping them on a track, giving feedback somewhere, engaging on a very musical, hands-on level with other people inside the same genre was a good idea. And it's through Instagram that just a booker at a venue here in Malmö had seen my release, because the right people followed me on Instagram, so it showed up on the venue's place, and this booker saw it and reached out to me. So it pays off, but it's a bit of a grind. And I think the only thing that separates people who make it onto stages from the people who just never quite get there are the people who keep going for it. It's the same kind of tenacity that's needed in the dance world. I keep bringing it back to that, but I think I have a lot of my discipline and approach in my music work. I have the dance world to thank for that, because you got to get used to a lot of rejection there, and, you know, just keep going, keep making projects on your own, keep releasing it, and keep trying to collab and exist in musical spaces, and eventually you'll make it out. And when it comes to the pure technical aspect of performing live, the synthwave genre was kind of easy enough. I played completely to backing tracks, 0 live elements. Eventually, I'd like to transition to having more and more live elements, finding someone who can play the keys, electric piano, having somebody to play a synthesizer, maybe even having electric drums on stage would be golden. I love the live experience. But with synthwave, I do feel that it's very possible, as long as you make sure to have mastered high quality backing tracks, that you can definitely go out and play those. One struggle though was finding a playback machine that isn't a laptop. I ended up having to use a laptop anyway, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it is a bit risky, because there are a million things that can go wrong with the laptop. And there used to be a nice device back in the day that you could use literally just for playback, that had the stereo output, and you just select your track, play it, easy peasy. But nowadays you have to go into buying a sampler or buying a loop pedal, buying these different things that aren't technically made to just be playback devices, and then using them to play back your tracks live. So that's something, if somebody's looking into going from just a living room to a stage, is like, make sure that you have high quality backing tracks then, and make sure that you have some way of playing those backing tracks live at a very high quality. The last thing in the world you want is to sound like a karaoke artist. Just
Yeah, it's there's a few things to take away from that. I think the first one is when you mentioned there about the whole finding a social media platform or an online presence somewhere, and selecting one, and sort of like building your visibility there, which is huge, and it's something that I've and also sort of summarising what you said at the end there about how just be consistent and just keep going as well, because it can get quite disheartening, I think. I've been releasing music, and I was in a band for well over sort of 8 or 9 years and writing myself, so I'm 15 years into this releasing my own music journey, and but it can get quite disheartening when it doesn't go right. But I think you're right in saying that you just got to keep going and keep continuing, because people will fall off the wayside, and then you'll just gradually you'll be there. But it's a hard slog, isn't it? I think, like with content as well. Content is king, and I hate saying that, because a lot of the time I spend creating content rather than actually being creative, which kind of beguiles me a bit. But it's tricky. I don't know what you think.
No, I was just thinking, I have quite I'd like to think that I have quite thick skin about that side of things, but God, I feel like right after I released my debut album just about a month ago, I released, I announced it on my socials and such, and then I think a week later I switched my profile picture to have it suit the aesthetic better, and I got more interactions with a fucking profile picture than I did with my music, and I was like, come on, this is my heart and soul creations in this full-length album. It's so much heart and dedication, and a little picture of my face is like what people care about more. I'm like, that really took me like oh God. But I figure it's just the way it is with social media nowadays. Again, the people who just grind away at it, go back to the studio, keep rehearsing, make more music. It's the only way to keep it going,
Yeah, I think it's a glowing indictment, isn't it, really, of social media, what you mentioned there about how you change your profile picture and then that happens. It's it's like when you release a new song and you get so many plays, and then I don't know, I think I released some random video, it might have been of my cat or something like that, and you just get more interaction from that than this piece of work that I've slaved over for like 6 months. And then there's just this random animal doing something, or it might be something I've captured on the fly when I've been out and about. But that is the nature of the beast, unfortunately. Yeah. But to move on to what you said there about performing live, it's quite cool what you said there about, obviously it's important to have that high quality backing track that you're performing to, and more artists I'm talking to now are taking to the stage, and it's great for me because it's something I want to get back to at some point. And what I'm able to do through these interviews is like cherry pick all these great ideas that our artists have, and then at some point I'm going to have this Frankenstein of a live performance thing. And maybe I'll dedicate a whole episode to how I've taken influence from yourself. And I spoke to Daniel Hugh about it as well, who's on the same label as me. And I'm speaking to, for the audience listening now, I'm going to be talking to Zach Vortex next week. When I say next week, what's the date today? It's like the 7th or something. So at the end of May, the next week in May, and I'm going to get ideas from him. And it's great. And it's just great, I think, to see live music again. It's, I don't know about you, but I've missed it incredibly over the last year or so. But it's... So just to sort of summarise your where you want to take the live performance side of things, do you think you'll have, because you're going to be singing, are you going to be playing any other instruments as well?
Nah.
Will you be the drummer that sings?
Nah, I mean, I thought about it. I feel like I could pick out, because I make everything on my tracks myself, I could technically play any of it. But I very much want to develop the singing and the connection with the audience and that performance. So I may very well change my mind at some point. But for now, the goal is only singing for me. And then maybe rather gathering some form of live band from musician friends who can play the instruments to give it a bit more dynamic.
Amazing. So I think what we'll do is just to sort of like summarize or rather conclude the podcast interview would be like, are there any key dates or any news or anything coming up on the horizon that you'd like to let our audience know about?
Yeah, I thought about this when you asked it before, and it's a tragic no, not really.
That's okay.
But, I mean, there are plans in the works. There is a music video in production that might show up soonish, maybe. And hopefully a lot more gigs. But I guess it depends on how much of a Swedish audience you have, because I think I'll primarily be playing in my hometown a bit to get my feet wet as a solo artist here.
I was going to say, we do have, I looked at my metrics the other day, and we do have some Swedish listeners.
Oh.
I couldn't say how many, but there are some Swedish listeners. Oh yeah, we get about on the podcast. It's growing.
Nice.
But we have a few. Hopefully we'll have a few more now. But what I'd like to just ask you now is, where can our audience find you online? Where's the best place to, you mentioned Instagram, where's the best place for them to find sort of you on socials and your music?
Yeah, I'd say socials is Instagram. That's what I try to be most consistent on. So if you're looking to find gigs or such that are coming out, keep an eye on my Insta. It's Totta's Voice, Tottas Voice. And otherwise, music-wise, I release basically everywhere digitally, so Spotify or Apple Music would be the easiest ways to find me.
Marvellous. I'll add those, put those in the show notes for everyone to go and check out. So Totta, a massive thank you for joining me on this today. It's been great to pick your brains on like music and hear your background and story as well, which is a fantastic listen, I must say, and getting the songwriting and compositional process. So yeah, a big thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. And, it's been my pleasure.
Yeah, no, it's been brilliant. Yeah, it's been brilliant. And good luck with the new music and the gigging as well. I'll keep an eye on Instagram and see how that goes.
Yes.
And yeah, fantastic once again, and I'll speak to you soon.
Lovely, thanks.